Well, hey, y'all, welcome to Certainty for Uncertain Times. My name is Lauren, and this channel is all about helping you navigate through the chaos, the clown world, and the dumpster fire that we all find ourselves living in these days through the lens of the Bible, but also while connecting those dots to Bible prophecy. So, if you are looking to dive a whole lot deeper into the Bible's prophetic puzzle pieces, then I'm going to ask that you would smash that like button, you would subscribe, hit that bell, and of course, share this video. It does help me to get seen since the tech overlords are not really my friends. And today I've got one of my favorite people on, Mondo Gonzales, and we are going to be talking about the red heifers and of course the 10 kings on Voices of Certainty. But before we get to that, just a few quick reminders. Check that description box because all the goods are down there. You've got resources, links to connect with Mondo and all of his projects. We've got discount codes for the Prophecy Watchers conference that I was at Christmas. We've got, of course, all kinds of t-shirt stuff down there. You guys are always asking about these t-shirts. Those links are down there too. And of course, if this channel has been a blessing to you, first and foremost, I covet your prayers. I know you guys are praying for us and the channel is growing and it's going so well and we're super excited about it. So pray that this video gets in front of the right people. And second to that, as many of you guys know, I am still working at Texas Roadhouse as a second job. And I'm asking for continued prayers that the Lord just continues to restore the business that Lance and I have had to kind of recover from after the economic downturn, and he is doing just that. And lastly, if you feel led to support this ministry, you can do that at the donation links down below in the description box. And we even have something called super chats now. That's kind of new, so you can do that. I appreciate all of that. And we also have a Q&A today. So if you have questions, make sure they're in all caps so Keegan can keep track of those. And Mondo and I will answer a few questions towards the end. And I think that's about everything. So without further ado, I am super pumped to have Mondo on here today talking about the 10 kings and of course the red heifers. So let me bring him on screen. Hello, Mondo. We are so excited to have you.
It's great to be here. You even got a clap.
Yes, I told you we moved up a little.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And I want to welcome, of course, you to our podcast as well. This is going to be kind of a double use, so this is good.
Yes, super excited to be here. And for those that don't know Mondo's background, Mondo is a pastor. He is a theologian. Do you have a degree in archaeology, Mondo?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I thought so. And then I feel like you also have something to do, I want to say, with astronomy. Do you have degrees in that too, or just
no? It's I took astronomy in college. It's more just a love, but we have the Psalm19project.com, which is yes. Our really university class observatory where we take some pretty phenomenal pictures of what God has created in the heavens. People can check it out. I got some new images that are just phenomenal that I'm getting ready to post on there. It's pretty cool.
Yes, your images are way, way cool. I follow all of that on Instagram and I love seeing it. It's just amazing to see. So, and I think the other cool thing about you too that people may not know, I know you mentioned it because you were on my Voices of Certainty channel. You're my first guest on this segment on my channel, and now you're coming back today. But you also took, I think you said Jewish studies, isn't that right? You know Greek and Hebrew, right?
Yeah.
Do you speak them both fluently? I was always curious about that.
Well, I do a little. I'll say it this way: I'm not fluent by any means in the sense of modern Hebrew, but I'm competent in Greek and Hebrew in the sense of translation from the Bible, for sure.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm having you back on today because obviously it's what a time to be alive. I don't really know how to say it any differently. I feel like I use that phrase all the time. But today we kind of want to talk a little bit about some of the updates going on with the red heifers and Third Temple preparations. You are a genius when it comes to that stuff. You have actually a book out, the Red Heifer Ritual book, which I also have linked down in the description box for people. So we're going to do that. And then we want to talk a little bit about shifting into the 10 kings that are talked about in Daniel and Revelation. So exploring whether or not these could be oligarchs or technocrats. It's something that I'm super interested in, especially with all we see kind of just weaving together in today's world. So we're going to have all of that in this conversation today. So with that, I think what we'll do maybe is start with the red heifers. So the last time I think I saw you on somebody else's podcast not too long ago, and I feel like you were talking about there were 2 purebred red heifers left. Can you give us an update on where things are at for today?
Yes, it's things in Israel right now are the mood is shifting, as we know, just geopolitically, even I would say religiously for sure, because of the Trump administration coming in. We saw in the last few days Trump releasing, for example, the 2,000-pound bunker buster missiles back to Israel. They're arriving. There's been some bulldozers that have been on hold by the Biden administration before. And people ask him, these kind of aggressive journalists saying, how could you let those bombs be given over to Israel? And he says, well, they bought them. I mean, they purchased them. We already got the money. So I'm just releasing what has already been purchased. And so, but the reason I bring that up is because the tone is shifted just, again, geopolitically, but the rabbis and the religious Orthodox, they love Trump. In fact, we know back in 2017-18, when Trump moved the embassy there, he was the only one that was willing to do what was in the law books. I mean, it was passed back in the Clinton administration, but he was the only president that had the guts to do it. And of course, threats of World War III and everything else did not come to fruition. He saw right through that, and he did it. And here it is. It's been 7 years. So the point being is that they call Trump a Cyrus Messiah, not the full Messiah, but a non-Jewish Messiah. And what it's doing now is it's creating a greater desire and I would say momentum for the idea of the red heifer ceremony to happen ASAP. We do know that there's conflicting information, and that's why. And let me clarify some things. Is on the Temple Mount or the Temple Institute Facebook page, you see often there, people could go there. They're the ones that are partnered with Boneh Israel as it relates to the red heifers and bringing them over. Well, on their page, they'll say there's only 2 that are qualified. Byron Stenson, who was the main Texas connection for Boneh Israel. They do a lot of other projects. Great guy. Love Byron. He was interviewed just recently. He said, no, there's 3. There's still 3 that are qualified. One is not as red as the others, but it's still qualified in a pre-qualification way. So all that to say, there's no upper age limit for these. That's another question that comes up often.
Yep.
And so these 3 are there. What we do know as well is the other 2 that have been disqualified. These are female cows. They are in the process of being artificially inseminated in order to continue the genetic offspring. And these cows are beautiful for the Israeli breeding program. So things have not stopped for sure.
Wow. Okay. So with them, that brings up a whole new question I didn't even have written down for you. With them being artificially inseminated, does that disqualify them at all?
Oh, not at all. Because at the end of the day, they're using another bull. They're just making it easier so they don't have to bring the bull over.
Okay.
And they're able to get this this contribution from if you want to say it that way.
That's a great way to say it.
That's politically correct.
Yeah.
From very pure red heifers, whether those are in the information that's come out, whether those cows are in Texas or in America, most likely it doesn't matter. But again, these animals are very genetically beautiful and pure in that regard. And it takes the fascinating thing to me is the Bible never says, it just says a red cow, red heifer, red female cow, not a calf, not a bull. So, but what the rabbis have done in their typical way is they will add on all these prescriptions and requirements that are over the top, pretty standard fare when you study the Talmud or the Mishnah, the Jewish writings. And so to have God in his providence to allow even one cow to meet not only the biblical requirements, but all these extra rabbinic requirements truly is amazing. So, again, if anybody watch me, I'm not a sensationalist. I don't like hype, actually. But we can say with just as a matter of fact, with as non-hype mentality as possible, this is the first time in 2,000 years where you not only have 1 qualified red heifer, but we have 3. Mm-hmm. So that is unprecedented in historic times. And even, going all the way back to the 1st century.
Wow. Okay. So for somebody that's new that might be watching this video and maybe is, heard chatter around the interwebs about these cows and the significance and Israel's building a 3rd temple, what does that mean? So maybe let's have you answer the question of why does the red heifer sacrifice need to be completed before the 3rd temple can be built? Because that's obviously a big deal.
So, yeah. So let me, what I see, if you see this on the Temple Institute page, they will say it's absolutely not a sacrifice. Sacrifices take place on the Temple Mount, on the altar. which is true. Okay.
Okay.
So their language, just so that they don't yell at us, you know, their language is, this is a ceremony. It's a red heifer slaughter. There's no doubt they kill the animal and then they burn it whole on the Mount of Olives. We know that from historical documents in the Mishnah, which was about 200 AD. So it goes back a long way. This isn't anything new. So what we know is this, and this is important. The Bible doesn't specifically have a prophecy about the red heifer. And so, you know, in my book, I say, hey, there's no specific prophecy, but what we recognize is the inference that in order to use the temple is prophesied. Daniel 9:27, 2 Thessalonians 2, Matthew 24, Jesus, and John in Revelation 11. So we have 4 witnesses that show that there will be a temple, a third temple, physical temple, not a figurative temple, a real temple that's going to be rebuilt. So we look at that. Hypothetically, conceptually, the third temple could be built today, okay, but it can't be used until they have the ashes of the red heifer. Now, that is standard coming out of the Bible, because in Numbers chapter 19, the ashes were given in order to cleanse people who are ritually impure, primarily through being in interaction with the dead person or a dead area or a building or a grave or something like that. So so the inference then is, and the rabbis know this, they say, well, okay, their goal has always been talking about building the third temple, but they know, well, we could build it, but can't use it. We need the ashes because the whole area has been contaminated by Muslims and others. And even today, the people, if you're born in a hospital, according to ritual rabbinic rules, doesn't matter. If you're born in a hospital, you're automatically, right out of the gate, you're born in a ritually impure environment because could be dead people there. And so there's a whole bunch of other things that they've done in order to counteract that for priests. They have priests who were not born in hospitals and other things. So they actually have never been declared impure. So you do have people that could perform this ceremony who are ritually pure, but they need the ashes in order to cleanse the people, in order to cleanse the area, in order to cleanse anything else that becomes impure, because even vessels, articles, things can transmit impurity. We see this in John chapter 2 as an example, that stone water pots are one of the few things that don't transfer impurities. It's very, very fascinating. Anyways, but nevertheless, so for the average, or just the Christian who doesn't get into all this stuff, I don't mean average in a bad way, just maybe that might not be knowledgeable. You say, why does this matter? Well, it matters because the Bible says the temple was there. Daniel 9:27 says there'll be sacrifices. And so we know it's going to happen, but it can't happen without the red heifer. And so the rabbis are doing this, and it shows us that now that we have 3 qualified red heifers, we are living in some exciting times for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing. I think that just kind of watching this happen over the last couple of years. I mean, before, what was it, 2021 was when they were first flown over, right? Or was it 22?
September 15th of 22.
22. Okay. Before that, this just wasn't even a conversation really that was getting any like media coverage or anything, because it wasn't there. So we have that. And then when you go down the list and you see that they actually have all of their articles prepared. I mean, I do follow the Temple Institute on all their social media. It's fascinating stuff to just read through, because they're set. They're doing this. This is like, yes. So for people out there who say that there's not going to be a third temple rebuilt, it's laughable to me, because they are going to get it done. So here's a question I was thinking it maybe might be good for you to even help the audience understand, since you know so much about this. Can you give us a rundown of everything that's kind of already prepared for the third temple? Like, what do they have ready according to Levitical requirements and all of that?
Absolutely. So the best thing for people, if they're interested in it, it's kind of like you said, it's fun, is to go to the templeinstitute.com. You can also visit their YouTube page where they have the architectural plans have already been produced. People can watch the videos of what the temple would look like in a modern setting rather than an ancient first century setting. But if you go there, I've been there many times to their place in Israel. It's in Jerusalem. They have the golden menorah, which we know is required, huge, and it's covered in real gold. This isn't fabricated. The altar of incense is, again, when you go into the temple, you have the table of showbread on the right, you have the menorah on the left, you have the altar of incense right there, right by what we would consider the veil or the curtain that separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant would be. So all those things are done. They're covered in gold. The priestly garments have been completed, the copper vessels, all the other things. It's pretty fascinating. You go there and boom, 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 all done. The harps, the instruments are all ready. The Levitical priests right now meet on a regular basis in order to not just practice their singing, but to develop and compose music. And so when you look at every single angle, the only thing that's missing is there's two things that are missing. One is the red heifer ashes, which would again allow it. And the second thing is the geopolitical will to accomplish this. And there's a lot of, and I document this all in the book, because you have the religious views and then you have the secular political views. And so but what I document in there is how much has changed in the last 10 years, 20 years. You go back to, again, 1945, when there is no Israel. You think just in some people's lifetimes, how much the religious or the prophetic landscape has changed. It's pretty amazing. So for those that that don't know about that, right now we can say they have everything they need. They even claim they have a model of the Ark of the Covenant, but they claim that they have the real one just hidden somewhere. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but nevertheless, they have everything they need except the red heifer ashes, and those are forthcoming. We can say it that way.
Wow. And then they have, I remember hearing this again from you and just from other things that I've been, watched videos and studied on this particular topic, but the Cohen family, the young boys, they even have like this, I don't know if you'd call it like a ranch. I mean, that's what I would think of to call it, but they have a place where these kids are at. They've never been exposed to certain things that would disqualify them. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, the fascinating thing about it is I mentioned a little bit earlier that they have several people who are several young men who are Cohen. Cohen is the Hebrew word for priest, and they were, again, born in a situation where they've never touched the dirt. Now, why in the world are doing this? Well, because in Numbers 19, you have the whole chapter, which is one of the primary ways to become unclean is to be in the vicinity of a dead person. So what the rabbis have done is said, okay, well, how do we make sure that we can never violate this commandment? Well, what they've done in their own perspective is there's several ways to overcome this, because you can't walk on a grave. Well, a grave is in dirt, so you can't go out there and just walk in the field, because hypothetically there could be a dead body there. So then you become ritually impure, and now you're ritually impure forever until the ashes of the red heifer. So what they do is, if you walk on bedrock, okay, well then obviously nothing's going to be buried under bedrock. Or what they'll do is they will have a deck, like decking, or a raised stage, like we have a stage or platform that's off the ground. There's air between it. So what you have is, if you live in a house that is above the ground and you walk around, then you're fine. You'll never be touching the dirt. So what they've created is, like you said, these dwelling places where it's all elevated, and when the kids go out to play, they're never allowed to play on the dirt from the time of they were born. They can go on animals. You can ride, as long as you're off the ground. There's mentioned in the Mishnah where there was a bridge that went from the Temple Mount across the Kidron Valley to the Mount of Olives, where if you walked on these raised arched walkways, then as a priest, you were not on the ground. And so then you're okay, because you will never get contaminated that way. So they take this very seriously. And these priests who have been born in this environment forever, since they're 18, 19, 20 years old now, their entire life has been in this situation, because they need to remain pure, so that on the day of that ceremony, they will be, it's interesting that they will be conducting the ceremony in their pure place, at least ritually. As they do the ceremony, the cow now becomes unclean, and after that happens, the uncleanness of the cow transfers over to the priest. So he actually becomes unclean. But through the ceremony, they collect the ashes, and later they mix it with water, and they could sprinkle him in a ceremony. It takes 7 days, and he could get his purity back. So if you take all that, there's some theological implications there too, as it relates to Jesus and the book of Hebrews. But it's extremely fascinating the ways in which they are serious about it, and they can do it.
Wow. And then I remember hearing something, and I actually forgot to write this down, but it just popped into my brain about this would be the 10th red heifer sacrifice, but they have all the ashes going all the way back to Moses. And was there something that, oh man, I feel like I heard something about them putting it all together. Is there any merit to that?
No, there's a couple there's some truths in there.
Okay.
In that they from ancient times, the Mishnah and another gentleman, well, he's not a gentleman, just whatever, a rabbi in the medieval times. His name's Rambam, Moses Maimonides. He wrote a book called the Mishnah Torah, which was a commentary on the Mishnah and the commandments. And so he discusses in there, and it's known that there have been 9 red heifers, or at least alleged 9 red heifers that have been offered, again, in the ceremony from the time of Moses, the last one being in the 1st century or the time of Jesus. And so what he says is, and he's writing around 1200 AD. And I remember, reading his books in college because that was part of my studies. But he makes the claim that the 10th red heifer will come at the time of the Messiah, the time of the Messiah's arrival. And so he has said that the Messiah himself will perform the ceremony. Now, the rabbis today, they don't embrace that, because that's a very restricted view. And they're like, well, we don't necessarily think it has to be the Messiah himself, but nevertheless, when that 10th red heifer comes and the Cohen, the priest, performs the ceremony, it will reveal to us that the time of the Messiah's arrival is at hand. And so we look at this and we go, as a Christian, yes, we would even agree with that, but it's the Messiah's second coming, which is at hand. And so, but nevertheless, they recognize that they will say that the red heifer is actually being provided by the Messiah in their own way. It'll be offered, the ashes will get there, and it will complete the prophetic overtones that were given by Moses Maimonides, going way back. And again, their hearts and desires is the 10th one will be the final one.
Wow. And is it accurate to say, I mean, that's wild. That's what I remember hearing too, is that it was the 10th would signify the coming of the Messiah. Mm-hmm. But we know as Christians right now, we know that with the coming tribulation, we know that like they're waiting on, the inverse of that. And they're not keen to that. They're waiting on the Antichrist, and they don't even know it. So I think that's what's really just wild about seeing all of this, taking place in our generation right now, and seeing how close we are to some of this stuff actually coming into fruition. So the other thing that I read, and I wish I could find this article again, so I wanted to ask you, because I thought, man, maybe he'll know. I heard about it last year, but there was some kind of significant discovery of like some blue ink that was derived from a specific type of snail, which has also not been seen in over 2,000 years. And I would love for you to shed some light on that, if you know that, and how that is connected to, again, those garments that, go to the third temple and all of the ceremonial stuff.
Yeah, the snail is the Murex trunculus. And it's, what is important about it is they're going back to around the year 2000, from an archaeological perspective, the Muslims were conducting these illegal just construction on the Temple Mount. And so they were doing it, they were trying to do it secretly. And at the time, the Israeli government was very weak in that it was not enforcing, it was not enforcing that there's a law that's not allowed. So what they were doing is they were digging out all this dirt and they were dumping it in the Kidron Valley, 9,000 tons. So truckload after truckload, all of a sudden the Jewish people who are paying attention, especially the archaeologists, they're paying attention. They're going, hey, where are all these truckloads of dirt? They're just bringing them out because the Muslims there were trying to basically ingratiate themselves further on the Temple Mount in order to prevent any further expansion potentially by the Jewish government. So Around 2004, it's called the Temple Mount Sifting Project. You have a group, Gabriel Barkay, very well-known archaeologist. What they decided was, you know what? We don't know the context of this, but we're going to go extract all that dirt and move it and bring it to where we can look through it. And so they did. And so they have found, so they did this, and they started this sifting project where they took the dirt, they sifted it in an archaeological, tools, and they started finding all these things from the first temple period, things certainly from the second temple period. But one of the things that they found over 20 of these Murex trunculus shells, these snail shells, which they had knew from other writings that the blue dye that is very rare, it's very unique, it's very expensive. We know on prayer shawls, talit, that in Hebrew, or the tzitzit that you see at the bottom is blue colored, as well as the priestly garments. Mm-hmm. And this blue dye that was used to color these garments comes from this snail. And so the fact that they discovered it in a First Temple context, these 20 shells, they're like, this is where they got the blue dye. And so that they had, certainly the idea is, or the educated guess is that the priests at the time had a very large snail operation in order to get the blue dye, because, for example, it takes about 10 or 12,000 shells to get a couple grams of this snail dye ink that they use.
Wow.
So you would have to have a big operation. So the fact that they found them there in an archaeological context, again, reveals that there most likely was a full operation there to continue this dye. So lately, now that they've discovered that, they've come to go to the snail, and through the process realize that this is how they get the blue dye. If you leave it out in the sun as well, it can modify the colors to different things. But no doubt, again, this is why I love archaeology, because archaeology comes to reveal some things that would have been unknown. But the ultimate goal, it would be to excavate on the Temple Mount, because there's so much knowledge that is currently off limits, but yet it worked against them, the Muslims that were there, in trying to really deface the underground. They dumped all this material, and now our Israeli archaeologists are gaining knowledge from it. And again, proving what? That there was a Jewish presence on the Temple Mount.
Right. Wow. And again, for us as believers, it just again goes to just hammer home that the word of God is alive and accurate, and all of these things that are talked about that have yet to come to pass shall come to pass. It's amazing. It's truly fascinating. So, okay. So now we've kind of shifted into, after the election and everything, and we have obviously somebody that is in power now, President Trump, and he is obviously very, in some regards, pro-Israel. I know there's a lot going on with the two-state solution talk right now, but he has a lot of people that are in his administration as well that seem to be very supportive of the Jews wanting to be able to rebuild their temple too. So what do you think, the Trump administration, the role, how do you think this role might come into play in advancing the third temple?
Yeah. So let's give a little background to that, because
sure.
We have Hegseth in there as defense. He's very, very strong. He's been on record talking about how he's all for building a third temple. Mike Huckabee, no doubt, same thing. Very pro-Israel, very, again, Christian prophecy, if you want to say that. Let's fast forward a year ago, or fast backwards, I guess, a year ago, where the ceremony, the Red Heifer ceremony, was supposed to happen in the Passover to Pentecost window of 2024, basically April to June. Well, at that time, Israel had been in its war with Hamas from October 7th. And so in addition, the Biden administration, not friendly to Israel, very much so. And so in January of, let me just set the context. So Israel, Netanyahu, I think, is the right person for the job, for sure. He recognizes, and he always has, the existential threat of being surrounded by either Hezbollah or Hamas. And so he said very clearly that there is no future for Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So as he's doing this, he's fighting against the American administration at the time, the Biden administration, who, for whatever reason, wanted, I mean, it's just sick. They wanted to see Hamas continue to be in power. Why that is, I don't know. If it does it go back to Obama? Probably. Okay. But nevertheless, so what Netanyahu is looking, he's recognizing we need weapons from the United States. And therefore, he's trying to do that political navigation in trying not to upset Biden in order to, which would then, as he showed, which would prohibit or either limit or restrain weapons from being delivered to Israel, which they've already paid for and are entitled to through agreements. And so, but you have the religious component of the government. The religious government in Israel right now, the government is the most religious in the history of Israel in 78 years. Okay, but so here's Netanyahu walking this. He's got his religious component that is trying to press for greater sovereignty on the Temple Mount, and Netanyahu's looking like, hey, I know that's important, but we just need to survive. We have an existential threat again, as we know, in April and October. Iran has launched rockets, so you have all this backdrop. And then what happened, the reason this came out even more was, of course, October 7th of 23 is when the terrorist attack took place. Prior to this, there was zero mention ever by Hamas of the red heifers. Zero. But come January of 24, they made a public statement that one of the reasons that they attacked in October was because of the red cows. They mentioned them specifically.
I know, I saw it. I shared it everywhere.
So here we have this now very specific mention. And now Netanyahu's like, okay. So in my interviews with Byron at the time, prior to that announcement, Byron's like, hey, Mondo, roughly November, December of 23, we got permission. We're planning on the ceremony taking place in April of 24. Pray for me. We're trying to do a live stream for 800 million people. And so I'm like, oh, wow. So you had all this thought and that momentum, that discussion was happening from July of 23. So even before the terrorist attack. Okay. So fast forward again there to November, December. And then in January, Hamas comes out with this. And then talking to Byron, he's like, Mondo,
it's halted.
Squashed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can't talk about it. Can't make it public. And so you see the Temple Institute publicly now reshaping the conversation to say, oh, no, everything's on hold. Or, we want to do it this is a joyous event. There's nothing going to be secret here. And so a lot of people ask if it's been done in secret. It's impossible for it to be done in secret because when you're on the Mount of Olives, you have two locations that are potentials. The Mount of Olives is surrounded by Jewish settlements and or Jewish cities, and as well as Palestinian cities. So if you have a bonfire, I mean, think about having a bonfire in the middle of town. You can't hide that.
No, the smoke's going to be big.
Smoke. I mean, it's going to be the police are going to be called, the fire department's going to be called. So you at least have public, and then of course being surrounded by Palestinians, they know that has to happen on the Mount of Olives. So it cannot be done in secret. So everything got squashed. So all that being said, that status quo maintained all the way through the end until January 20th, just a few weeks ago. Wow. Because they know, well, Biden's out now, Trump is in. So with Trump already providing weapons and releasing all the ones that they paid for, what I believe is happening is you still have the ceasefire with Lebanon, and you have the negotiations and the releases of hostages with Hamas. So over the next few months, as that situation potentially settles, the security situation is going to settle. So it doesn't need to happen at Passover. That was just something that was suggested. But any of the feasts of Israel throughout the year is when they prefer to have it, because there's a lot of interest in what's happening in the festivals. And so they're thinking, well, wouldn't it be great in one of the major festivals, whether that's Passover or Pentecost or even the fall feasts of Rosh Hashanah, Tabernacles, Existential Feast of Weeks, whatever. Just having the
Do you
Let's
feel like it'd
connect
be
it
more
with one of these.
beneficial for them to have it? Like they kind of, not that they have to, but they would want to? Is that what you're kind of driving at?
Yes, that they
Okay.
have said that they want to coincide it with other festivals so that the excitement is there and there's an interest in them. And let's do the ceremony. So with Trump now in, the rabbis, man, their mood has shifted. They are living on cloud nine and believing that this could be the year. They're, let me just say this, that they will, the other risk is most people talk about is the longer they wait,
Hmm.
the longer there's a potential for of the three remaining red heifers to become disqualified. So there again, there's no upper age limit, but simply just getting older.
Okay.
Getting gray hair. As things happen when you get older. So these animals potentially could be modified. So it is in their best interest to do it sooner rather than later. But they have shifted to say we want all of the rabbis to buy in, which the rabbis currently fight amongst each other, just like the Pharisees and the Sadducees did in the first century.
Nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. They have factions. And so what they want is, if they do the ceremony, they want it to be accepted by the other factions. Will that be the case? So they're trying to build a consensus on this. Who knows how far that is happening and when it will. But nevertheless, now that Trump's in, we have a 4-year window, so to speak, of high anticipation.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so. And then I remember you saying this too, that I've seen you mention this in a couple of different interviews, that Benjamin Netanyahu almost feels like he's like divinely called to see the temple rebuilt. Hopefully I didn't make that too extreme with the wording, but I feel like I've heard you say something to that degree, that he feels very called to be a part of getting this done.
Yes, I have that from a firsthand source from Robert Mawiri, who was involved in the finding of the red heifers. And he's a well-known, well-known person. He's been recognized by Israel for his contributions, one of the top 50, whatever. And he said, Mondo, I'm on a first name basis with Netanyahu. And I said, well, can I share this publicly? He goes, yeah. He goes, Netanyahu told me privately, between him and I mean, obviously it's public information now, but that he said, Robert, I feel that God has called me to be the prime minister who helps rebuild the third temple. Now, I don't know people's hearts. I don't know what the motive is. Is he being truthful? Is he being a politician? I don't know. Nevertheless, Robert said he didn't hit to his ears. This is what Netanyahu told him. So to me, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's fact in the sense of God's perspective, but at least he has spoken that he feels to be led in that direction.
Wow, that's wild. And then, okay, so you mentioned the shelf life. They don't have a shelf life. The main thing to be concerned about would be aging and just blemishes occurring, that sort of thing. So that's why it's probably not in the best interest to keep waiting. So do you think, just in what all of you know, do you feel like we could see something happen at Passover this year?
I would think that that's the desire. To me, Passover's in April, so that's only 3 months from now or so. Not being a prophet, but geopolitically, I would be reluctant to think it would happen that soon, only because there's so much to get done in order to bring calm to the Hamas situation. I do think after this upcoming ceasefire is completed and the hostages are there, and once Israel realizes that there are no more living hostages, then I think, as Trump said, his words, all hell is going to break loose, because Netanyahu cannot, and Trump has said the same thing, Hamas has no future there. And so sadly, and you can see this again geopolitically, that Trump is trying to transplant those that are in Gaza to different parts of the world, whether even it's Jordan or Egypt, even to Albania. He's trying to find countries who are willing to take some of these people. Honestly, I feel bad, and you see this different ways. I feel bad for the Palestinian people there, because they are under the oppression of Hamas.
Oh yeah, definitely.
No doubt. Many of them would. There's nothing there. That they're going back to their place in the north. There's nothing. Houses are gone because Hamas has hijacked hospitals, kindergartens, schools. These are wicked people, and that are oppressing their own people. And of course, when you're an oppressed people, they're more oppressed by Hamas than they are by Israel. That is just a fact, because what you do see is videos coming out where these humanitarian aid trucks are coming in. The average person, that's just a family, is trying to go there, and they're getting beaten or killed by Hamas, who are confiscating all this aid and not allowing the people to have it in order to perpetuate their own terrorist ambitions and to have supplies. So they don't really care about the people. And there's others, honestly, there's others in the civilian population who are loyal to Hamas, sadly. And so, you know what? Trump is thinking, if you want to leave, we want to find places for you to leave, because in many ways, if you go back to even the United Nations resolutions, 1947 and others, there is a Palestinian state. It's called Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan, it was the Palestinian state going all the way back to the foundations of Israel. Again, by the United Nations themselves. So, but Jordan doesn't want them, because they also know the reason Jordan kicked him out in not ancient times, but in the past, is because you had political factions like Hamas who threatened to disrupt and overthrow the king, the Hashemite kingdom. So they don't want them there because they're troublemakers.
Right.
Hamas has caused trouble wherever they go. So it's no surprise then that Jordan doesn't want them either. But if we're going to be honest, Jordan was the original Palestinian state. So they have a state already.
Wow. Okay. Well, before we move on to our next topic, which is about the oligarchs, is there anything else that you think is worthy of us knowing or just kind of paying attention to on the landscape out there for, the coming third temple and just the whole red heifer situation out there?
I think that one of the things I've been discussing lately at many of our conferences is for the Christian who believes there's a future for Israel, national Israel. We know that Romans 11:26 and other passages. We know that God is not done and they have a future. Is for us to walk and navigate the waters very carefully, theologically, not only from the Old Testament, from primarily the New Testament. That Romans 11 says quite clearly that the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable.
That's right.
But what we see there, Paul saying, again, in the 50s AD, Israel was at that time, as a nation, was a rebel. They rebelled against Jesus, his messiahship. They got judged in 70 AD. But there are always believers, Jewish believers. And Paul says, look, he's writing to the Romans, for your sake, for the sake of the gospel, they are enemies. They reject Jesus. They deny Jesus. They reject the gospel. And that is true. But for the sake of election, they are still beloved. And so when we look at Israel today, we recognize Israel is not a perfect nation. It rejects the gospel. It rejects Jesus. Sometimes the government will hinder Christian evangelism. We know that the government of Israel is very into LGBTQ. It's very secular. It has a lot of immoral positions. So we don't deny any of that.
No.
For the sake of the gospel, they're enemies. But for the sake of their election, God has chosen them. They are beloved. And it doesn't say they were beloved.
No, it says they come in unbelief. Yeah. I mean,
yes.
They'll be rebuilt in unbelief. Yes, for sure.
Yes, they come back in unbelief. So if you look at Romans 9, Paul says, man, I'm so sorrowful for them. And I just want them to be saved. But to them belong the adoption, the covenants, the promises. It wasn't past tense. He does not use past tense there. So even in the midst of their rebellion in 53 AD, when he's writing this, they were still beloved. They weren't cast away. Has God cast away his people? By no means. As a nation, he's very clearly, this is not about individuals. This is about a nation. So I think for us as Christians, when we try to teach others, even other Christians that don't believe in a future for Israel, that there is a future for national Israel, that it's not over. We haven't replaced them. Oftentimes what you see in other Christians is they bring up all the negatives. Oh, you're saying that God's blessing the nation of Israel today when it's LGBTQ. It's just, have you read the Old Testament? Yeah. Think about what they were doing in the Old Testament when they rebelled against God or they got cast off into Babylon. They're having all these wicked ceremonies in the temple itself. Read the book of Ezekiel.
Right. Sacrificing their own kids to Moloch.
Yes.
And all kinds of, yeah.
So you look at this and you go, were they still God's covenant people, chosen people then? Yes. Just because they're wicked doesn't mean that the promises have been revoked. And that's true in the Old Testament. It's true in the first century when Paul's talking about it. And it's true in the 21st century. So I think if we navigate the waters carefully, we can recognize that, yes, Israel has ways to go. They're in unbelief. They're in a state of rebellion and wickedness against God, but they're still his covenant people and they have a future. And God is going to restore them when they come to faith in Jesus. There's not any other way. But that's the whole purpose of the tribulation period.
Amen.
The 70th week of Daniel is to humble them. Daniel 12:7. Daniel says, the angel said to Daniel, look, there's going to be a time of trouble coming for the Jewish people that is, and really we know it extends to the world during the book of Revelation. The power of the holy people will be shattered, but they will come to faith and trust in Jesus by the end of that period. So God bringing Israel back after 1,800 years, 1,900 years to the land, giving them the land in unbelief, not because they deserve it. They belong there because of the promises, not because they deserve it. He's doing this. There's a future for them. And right now they trust in themselves. They don't trust in the God of Israel. So I think as we think about the whole topic of the third temple, this is Christian prophecy. It's Daniel. Daniel spoke about it too. It's biblical prophecy. But we also recognize that when we look at Israel today, it is not what they're going to be. So let's not make that mistake of thinking just because they're in a state of unbelief and rebellion that this is what God is doing. God is, just like in the Old Testament, God is going to humble them. Read the book of Judges. He's going to give them oppression. They're getting oppressed right now. I mean, what we see right now, it's interesting to me that if you look at the trouble that they're getting from the people like of Hamas, read the book of Judges. Who was harassing them in that time? The Philistines. Where'd they live? Gaza.
Right.
It's a complete cycle. God allows these things in order to get their attention, just like in the book of Judges. They didn't hear it the first time. And so God allows the oppression to go up. Ultimately, the greatest oppression for Israel is going to happen during the tribulation by the Antichrist. Mm-hmm. And they're going to call out on the name of Jesus by the end. And God, when the Bible says in Romans 11:26, all Israel will be saved, it will be fulfilled. And therefore, God will rescue them. Jesus will rescue them. And they will forever be in a state of joy and blessing in belief in their Messiah, Jesus.
Absolutely. It's a literal statement. I mean, Jesus said, I will not come back for you until you cry out, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So that is a literal state. Like, can it come back until the Jews cry out for him? The second thing that I think is important to note, and I see this a lot in my space just because of, we have a lot of people that are just searching for truth right now, but man, the anti-Semitism is on a rampage and a rise. And I see so many people that want to try to discredit the things that you and I are talking about here because the Rockefellers had, a part in, the state of Israel coming back to be, and the Rothschilds and who all is involved. And my big thing is like, if you know your Bible, then you see that God allowed wicked men to be used to serve his purposes at times. And this is one of those instances. The bottom line is that the prophecy's in there and it's been fulfilled to the letter. So it doesn't matter who was a part of it. And I get really tired of seeing that argument that somehow disqualifies what is happening right now. And if so, how do you explain all the things that are going on right now that are leading to the fulfillment of things that we're talking about on here today? That presents a bigger problem.
It's a very myopic view of the Bible in that the people get stuck in these very narrow things. And you think, okay, I hear what you're saying. I'm not denying the facts of what you're saying.
Right.
But it's like, well, don't, and I don't say this in a mean way, but it's like, have you not read the rest of the Bible? If you go back, Assyria in Isaiah chapter 10, Assyria he says, it's my servant. And Assyria came and judged the northern kingdom and removed it. Nebuchadnezzar, my servant. God uses wicked people. So the fact that if people can read Ezekiel 36, 37, 38, all these passages, God is the one claiming, I have brought my people back to the land. Now, granted, they are in unbelief, but yes, God uses wicked people all the time to accomplish his purposes. In fact, we know that the nation of Israel was founded by seculars and atheists. Okay, even going back to Theodore Herzl, he didn't do it because he was necessarily religious at all. He recognized that the persecution that was going on, and so he had that goal. So yes, God uses unbelievers to accomplish his prophetic means. I mean, look at Jesus being born in Bethlehem. He used a pagan king, Proverbs 21. The heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord. He moves it wherever he wants. He moved Augustus to create a census, which moved Joseph and Mary down. So people, I think, need to think a little broader, more theological, simply in the most narrow sense that these are wicked people. Duh! I mean, tell us something that we don't already know. So I think as well, for those that try to say that because Israel or that the people in Israel, the land of Israel, are not real Jews, I just prophecywatchers.com/Jews. I have a whole series of articles there on debunking all of that Khazarian myth and even the Rothschilds. It's like, who cares? Again, what you're saying does not disrupt, because at the end of the day, we know genetic studies, the Jews there are connected all the way back. That is undeniable. But even if we didn't have that, when God says, I will bring back my people from all the countries of the world onto the mountains, which had long been desolate for 2,000 years, I think God knows who his people are, and he knows their genetics. And if he brought them back in his sovereignty, I think God has it figured out. So I don't care, even if the genetics wasn't there or provable, God has said, I'll bring them back, and it's a fact that's happened, and God knows. That's enough for me.
Exactly right. Amen to that. I'll add that link down in the description box too, so people can go click that. Okay, so the second topic we were going to cover today was the mystery of the 10 kings. This one is a bit fascinating to me. So I'm going to give a little biblical context for the 10 kings. So the first thing is going to be a scripture reference from Daniel 7:24. So it says, the 10 horns are 10 kings who shall rise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And then Revelation 17:12 says, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. So can you set the stage explaining the biblical references to the 10 kings in Daniel and Revelation? And then, of course, how do these passages describe their role in the end times?
Will you read verse 13 as well?
Which one, of Revelation?
Yeah. Yes, yeah. Because 17, 12, and 13 give a cumulative effort. And there's no doubt he's describing from Daniel 7, no doubt. And so this, to me, this is the most important part of it, is 12 and 13. So maybe flow it again, if you don't mind, together.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go from 12. So the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. 13. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. Okay.
So the reason why this comes up, and I'm glad that people are interested in this, because let's just talk about for a moment the traditional approach.
Yep.
The traditional interpretation has always been, and it really was rooted in the Club of Rome.
Yep.
The Club of Rome, going back in the late 60s and early 70s, they come up. They're a globalist group. They came up with this idea of dividing the world into 10 regions, and so prophecy teachers at the time jumped on that and were like, hey, 10 regions, this goes right along with the 10 kings. Okay, so then now that interpretation is very pervasive, and so now when we see any discussion of a North American Union or a South American Union, or even BRICS to some degree, which BRICS really doesn't fit in it specifically because it doesn't follow the Club of Rome's designations. The African Union, we see African Union, Asia Union, you see European Union. So there's no doubt you see some of these conglomerates. Okay, so now when you see, like, for example, Trump talk about having Canada as a 51st state,
yeah, that's Greenland, on here too.
People, man, are jumping on this.
Yeah, like, same. I'm going, that's regionalism. What are we doing? Yeah.
This is the beginning of that. This is the beginning of the fulfillment of that concept. Well, I think that concept is not denying that the Club of Rome has that. That's a fact.
Right.
But I think it's erroneous because you read it. These are kings with no kingdom. So if you are a king, as an example, over South America, you have a kingdom, you have a region. These are kings with no kingdom. It is clear in the text. They do not receive their royalty or their ability to rule until they make an agreement with the Antichrist. And it says they hand over to him. They have one purpose. They hand over to him their power, their authority or their capabilities or their whatever over to them in order to rule with him. So that kingdom, any kingdom that they might have is not going to happen until the end of, or I would say the midpoint of the tribulation period. So what the kings are, it says these are kings that are without a kingdom. So I guess what I'm saying is when we see these things, people assume, well, okay, naturally to progress, if you have a South American Union, there's going to be one leader over that. Well, now all of a sudden that disregards scripture because they don't have that. Now, if people wanted to make the claim that that these regions are established after the midpoint and then they get their rulership as a king over there, that's fine with me. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at all of this, the revived, the beast system, we know from the book of Daniel, chapter 2 and others, is a revived Roman system. It's very clear that the fourth beast in Daniel chapter 2, the 2 legs of iron, as well as Daniel 7, that it has its time, and it's unusual in that it had its system and it disintegrated in the 5th century AD, at least in the West. And it was a Mediterranean-based system. The prince that is coming comes from that system, Daniel 9, 24 through 27. Mm-hmm. So he's part of that. So it's the main beast system is not even necessarily divided up into these regions. The Bible never says it. It's interesting. I have a quote from John Walvoord where he says, the text clearly says that these are kings with over countries or regions. It doesn't say that.
Yeah, it does. The text definitely doesn't. This is why it's fascinating to me to look at what we're about to get into with the oligarchs. Yes. Yeah.
So the second thing then, so as I was thinking through this, Gary and I were talking, if this was 4 years ago now, yep. He's like, hey, what do you think, Mondo? Do you think these are maybe oligarchs or technocrats? And I said, well, let's examine the text and see. And so the first thing we saw there was the Revelation 17:12. These are kings with no kingdom. You're like, okay, well, that's a little odd. And then the second thing we did is we looked in the lexicon. People can look this up. It's BDAG. When you're in seminary and you're taking Greek, you look at lexicon, Little and Scott, you look at other lexicon. The greatest lexicon up to date is the BDAG. They call it BDAG. It's just the names of the people that wrote this. BDAG. And so in there, what they do is they look at all of the instances of in literature, in the Koine area, New Testament Greek, etc., even in classical Greek to some ways. And they said, look, what we know is that the word basileus in Greek, its primary use is referring to a king of a kingdom, Charles over the United Kingdom, etc. The Roman emperor over all the different Roman geography. It comes with geography. That's the whole point. But they said this, we also see that the word basileus can also mean one who exhibits unusual power in a transcendent way, not a king over a region, but someone who simply has an unusual form of influence or power. And so I was like, hey, if we look at today's world and we go back, for example, to 2020, which is when, Gary and I were discussing this in 2021, who are some people that had unusual influence? Because if we talk about power, if I have power over you, I can influence you. For example, we see this. I'll give you one real example. Jeff Bezos, he comes in and he buys the Washington Post with money. Okay, he uses his money to gain what? To gain power or influence. And so now, if anybody wants to write an article that's critical of him, the editor squashes it and says, sorry. And they go, hey, the writer says, I stand by this. I have the facts. I got the receipts. I'm exposing him. He says, yeah, if you expose that, you won't have a job and I won't have a job and there will be no more. So we're not publishing that. And so simply by money, whether it's lobbying or conglomerations or bribery, you name it. So and I have articles in my presentation on this, even Politico, which is not a right wing, it's a left wing or media. They wrote an article back in 21 saying, why has Bill Gates, how does Bill Gates have the ability to influence governments of the world, the European Union, the UK, places in Africa? Why? He's got money. And so what you see is these oligarchs. These oligarchs simply means just rule by a few.
Yeah, that's what I have. Small group people having control.
Having control.
Yeah.
Which is the definition of the 10 kings.
Mhm.
So what you see is these unusual figures. I call them the 10 influencers rather than the 10 kings. They are 10 influencers with no region. They don't have a kingdom that they're ruling over. And so the question that you have is, who are some of the greatest influencers over governments today? Well, certainly Bill Gates, certainly Jeff Bezos,
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. Look at him now. He's influencing Trump. He influenced the election, no doubt, with his influence with Twitter and now X, etc. He's influencing the government of the United K government in order to reopen investigations simply by interviewing people. You have these non-governmental people, including Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, these non-governmental people who are involved in all things technology. And they're influencing world governments, the World Health Organization, other organizations in order to accomplish their globalist agenda. Now, isn't that interesting?
It is. And it seems that that's ramping up. And so that was my next piece was, we do see the rise of all of these technocrats. You've got Elon Gates, and I even put Klaus Schwab in there because he's not a figurehead. Like, he's not liked by people. He's liked by his cohorts, I suppose, but by us, the peons that they they kind of want to run around. He's not liked by all of us, but he is still very influential, obviously, with the WEF. And they do wield a massive amount of power and influence. And it is wild to me how they are really influencing the way the governments of the world are working. So, these type of individuals definitely seem like it could be a fit there. And then, of course, I had written here that Revelation 17:13 says that they are of one mind and give their power and authority over to the beast. What kind of power and capabilities might these figures bring to the Antichrist system?
Okay, this is beautiful because we don't have to guess on this because, for example, in Revelation 13, we see three things that appear. People can look at the word authority, the word worship, you have buying and selling. So there's three main things that describe the beast system there. One is worship. So there's a religious system there. Another one is it dominates the entire world. So no matter, but we know there's resistors. For example, China is going to resist all the way the kings of the East. We see that. There's other people that resist, but the centralized focus is world domination, a centralized form of a revived Roman Empire, and no doubt primarily over Israel and the Mediterranean basin, which again is exactly what we saw with the fourth beast of Daniel chapter 2 and others. Okay, so but here's the thing. So you have economics there. It's long been known by prophecy teachers that in order to establish a mark which is able to prohibit buying and selling, you can always have the ability, black markets, etc., if you're using cash or gold or bartering. And so Bible teachers have said, hey, one of the best ways that this can happen is through a cashless society where everything's tracked, etc. So you have a tracking. There's no doubt if it's forced, this mark is forced, you need the ability to track people, to enforce, to have records of buying and selling, control, surveillance, etc. All these other things. So you have that just from a logical inference of reading Revelation 13. Okay. Well, then you come on the scene, the globalist Klaus Schwab. Okay, he's written many books, The Great Reset, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. Well, when you read his books, he says quite clearly, if you look at the appendix of his book, I believe it's The Fourth Industrial Revolution, or it might even be The Great Reset. He says, look, our goal is globalism. Our goal is to bring everybody together. But in order to accomplish that, we know that we cannot do it without technology. And so he lists 21 different technologies that they are seeking to support and implement through all of the various ways in order to accomplish their globalist agenda. Because, again, censorship, control, flow of information, whether it's artificial intelligence, which allows you to crunch all the data that's happening that you get from surveillance cameras, internets, emails, you name it, all the way around. Okay, so he lists quantum computing, he lists all of these things. Okay, so he says quite clearly, let's say he was the Antichrist. I don't think he is. Let's just say he was.
Right.
Hey, everybody, I want to establish my system, but I need technology. Okay, but he's only one person. So then what do you have? So what will you have in Revelation 17:13 is you have these 10 figures that come to him. And we know in verse 12 that they basically make an agreement, and they don't have a kingdom. They're non-governmental people of a region, but they make an agreement in order to get their ability to rule with the Antichrist for a short time. It says an hour. I don't think it's 60 minutes. It's just the word aura can mean an indefinite period, but a time period. So what you have then is the Antichrist coming on the scene. The 10 kings are on the scene first. In Daniel 7, it says is that the Antichrist arises out of that after them. So they're on the scene first. So when he comes to his position, he comes and he says, hey, I have this idea, and I'm going to consolidate my power, but I need surveillance. I need Starlink. I need ability to track the world. I need economic exchanges like PayPal, or even X Musk has desire to make an exchange.
Yep.
We see this already happening in China with Alibaba and these apps. There's so many cashless societies or cashless cities in China already that if you go there and you have to use the app. Okay, so it's automatic. You go there with cash, you're dead. Okay, you're not going to make anything. So what he does is he's like, oh, but I need to control information and censorship. Oh, well, we have X, we have Google, we have all the things we saw in 2022 and 23, Facebook. So imagine him coming and saying, I need all this.
Yeah.
And these guys come and they go, we can help you. Let's make an agreement. If you let us rule with you, we'll allow you access to all of our tech, which Klaus Schwab has already said is that's how they can accomplish it. So what we have is these unimaginable wealth. Like Musk is now worth 421 billion. Okay. No one's got that number so far. And if you look at the top 10, you'll see there's one non-American, one European on there, but all the rest of them are all the same culprits. Okay. And they are the ones that are at the forefront of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, all the censorship, etc. And they come along and they say, hey, I can provide this. They make an agreement. They give their power and their authority or capabilities over to him. To me, what's a guy? I mean, let's say you have a president of South America. Okay. So he's a single guy in a government, in a regional government position. Okay. He still can't do without technology. Mm-mm. So you look and say, what can he really offer? I mean, as he can offer that dictatorial power, but that's over a region, but he has a kingdom. These are kings without a kingdom that come and offer. So this idea, this concept, I'm not saying that I'm dogmatic and you have to believe this to be saved.
Oh yeah, no, this is just fun to talk about. No, it's for sure. Fun. Yeah, it really is, especially with
and it matches very well.
It really does. And I think, I was thinking too, because I am watching the whole regionalism conversation that Trump is doing. And it sounds like you kind of already answered this earlier, but just to make sure that it's out there. But Trump, he's pushing policies towards regionalism. And I had one time speculated, I wonder, because I wasn't thinking about the kings without a kingdom. I had one time was just thinking, I wonder if he could be one of those 10 kings, if it is, or, because if he's doing that, that could align with that traditional view. But it almost seems like that could conflict with technocrats.
Oh yeah, right? I don't think it's. I don't. Well, let me say it this way. Are they mutually exclusive? The views? Well, they're pretty strongly opposed in how they interpret things. Now, at the end of the day, when the Antichrist gets his full authority, we've got to remember that when he comes on the scene, he has some sort of position to make a covenant with Israel in Daniel 9:27. Whatever that, it doesn't even need to be. I don't think it's a political covenant. I think he's endorsing the Mosaic covenant to be reestablished. That's clear, I think, from the context. And so that being the case, when I got to sneeze, I think. Sorry.
No, you're good. We'll bless you if you do.
Yeah, get it out here. So what Bible teachers know is that the first 3.5 years is not full-blown dictatorship. Okay. He's on the scene. He's establishing himself, and he's integrating it because his point of complete domination, according to Revelation 12 and 13, is in the midpoint. When his wound is healed, and then he declares himself to be God, abomination of desolation. And then it says quite clearly, his rulership is for 42 months. We see that in the book of Daniel as well, that he's going to rule as a full dictator over the world, time and half a time, 3.5 years. So, however, let me just say this, that how he rules, does he then divide the world up into 10 regions? I don't know what his organizational strategy is. That doesn't, I don't even care necessarily about that.
Right.
That doesn't violate, I think, my view of the 10 figures, the 10 rulers in this regard. He should have some organization. But what we do know is that the typical Club of Rome doesn't fit because you have outliers. Again, the kings of the East and others, the king from the South. You have people that are not going to respect his domination, and they're going to resist it. But nevertheless, he's given, and let me say this, oftentimes when we look at prophetic phrases of the kingdom ruling over it devours the whole earth, we that clearly cannot mean every last individual, because you have resistors. Yeah. And so what you have is the Bible speaking in generalities at times. Yeah. Like for example, when the Magi came to Israel, or came to Jerusalem and talked to Herod, it says Herod was troubled and all Jerusalem with him. Well, does all mean every last individual? No, it doesn't need to mean that. And so what we do know is that in Revelation 13, that you have the domination of the Antichrist involving all tribes, tongue, nations, and people groups. So you have these broad terms that are used. It doesn't necessarily mean every last single individual in the world. But nevertheless, we'll see as we progress further how this comes to play. But it's an exciting concept. Mm-hmm. I think it's got some biblical defense. And now Musk, I mean, we don't have King Trump. Some people like to say that, but Musk is not sitting at the right hand of King Trump. He's involved. He's not even getting paid for his position, but there's no doubt he's got tremendous influence.
Oh yeah, he definitely does, for sure. And he seems very confident about what he wants to get done, and all of that as well. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And I think the big thing is that we know, as pre-tribulation rapture believers, that the 10 kings are going to be coming before the Antichrist. Mm-hmm. So it's something that, because we're not going to see the Antichrist, like he could be on the scene right now, but we are not going to know exactly who he is. I know we get asked that all the time. Who do you think the Antichrist is? Well, I don't know. There's some people that are in the running, but we'll just leave it at that. But we can possibly see this whole 10 king situation, rising. And so it's very interesting to watch. So before I open up for questions, what would you say the most important thing for believers would be a takeaway if they're going to, look at the 10 kings and kind of study their role in prophecy? What would that be?
I think there's two things that obviously we know 100% fact. Jesus is the Messiah. He's the Savior. Yes. Salvation is found through him alone. That's not up for debate. When it comes to other prophetic scenarios, it's good to be humble. It's good to think. It's good to be open-minded, not to be dogmatic. Yep. And don't hold our views with a tight fist. Again, as equivalent to Jesus being the Messiah. Okay, we know that. And so, in my regards, this gives us an opportunity to study Scripture and to, again, I don't like putting God in a box. I also like to challenge traditional viewpoints, because it's not done in an arrogant sense. I just don't want to be blind and go, oh, well, this is it, because, well, why is that? Well, because those three teachers said it. And even, Walvard and Dwight Pentecost and others who I respect. I think we need to do our own homework. We need to be able to think outside the box, and also, but to stay Scripture. So in this regard, this is why my idea in this is not just based on what I want to see. I think, again, we have, as we've been talking, these are kings without a kingdom. Basileus, it certainly is defensible. Unusual power. That it is unusual to have private. Let me just say it this way. One of the things that came up was so powerful for me was a couple of years ago. Well, not a couple of years ago. Last July, and before, I was speaking in Singapore, and I had been talking about this for a while, and I made this parable, or I wouldn't say call it a prediction, but I said, let me give you an example. And this is powerful to me, because I said, if there was a an explosion on the International Space Station. Right now, the greatest superpower in the history of the world, which is America, couldn't do anything about it. There were sanctions on Russia. We weren't participating with Russia because of the war in Ukraine. I go, so it would be like, Houston, we have a problem. Oh, wait. Elon, we have a problem. Because so the greatest superpower in the history of the world would be calling a private individual.
I know, it's so bizarre to me.
And you know what? 2 weeks later, it happened.
Yeah.
It happened.
I
was
know.
like, I've been talking about this for 18 months.
Yeah.
And now the exact situation happened where they called up Elon, and Elon sent the Dragon X capsule to go pick them up, and they did. And so it's interesting to me to have the greatest governmental organization in the history of the world having to call a private individual. That is the definition of influence and power and capability. And in an unusual way. Okay. So that's the definition of the word, an unusual power. So I think as we continue to watch this, I think what I want people to walk away with is, hey guys, it's exciting times. We are seeing, if you go back 20 years ago, I mean, look, 5 years ago, Elon was worth 29 billion. Okay. That's not, well, I mean, that's a lot.
Which is a lot. I mean,
it's a lot, but it's not a lot. He's worth 420 billion.
Right.
So if you go back 20, 30 years ago, you had rich people, but not like this. It's the internet has allowed people to grow in these values. And so we didn't have even the capability looking outward to try even understand what that Greek word could mean. Unusual power and abilities. Transcendent. See, that's the word transcendent. These are people without a kingdom. Their power and their influence is transcendent. That's not my word. That's the Greek lexicon people. That's their word. Where they have the ability to transcend. Their power can influence the UK. It can influence Africa. It can influence the United States government. So it transcends worldwide. To me, I hope people walk away and just go, okay.
Something to think about. Yeah. And yesterday I saw a news article too that Bill Gates is possibly talking about, or I'm sorry, Microsoft, but Bill Gates is wanting to possibly pick up TikTok. And I was like, that's interesting. You know, so it's just like, it's just another, it's another coin on the table for that. You know, it's just very interesting to me.
to control information. Because again, I mean, that's why dictators, if you go back to America, the King of England wanted to restrict the flow of information because that's how rebellions happen. And so that's why we have in the First Amendment, we realize in order to cast off tyranny, you have to be able to have the freedom of speech. Yeah. That's the first thing that's going to be squashed by the Antichrist.
Yep, for sure.
And he's going to have his buddies out there, which 2020, I mean, COVID was a great example of how it wasn't the governments necessarily. The governments went to the people, you know, and here's Zuckerberg we saw last week was crying foul. He's a victim. He's not a victim.
Oh, I know.
They made
Can you
do
please
it. They made
shut
me
up?
do it.
I do not want to hear about that, Mark. Like, they were the main reason like that our business got censored so much was because we spoke up against the tyranny. And I mean, they shut our ads down for my husband's fitness business. It was insane. So I am like, I don't care what he has to say at all.
No sympathy for
none.
For Mark.
No,
none at all. But
okay, go ahead.
It helps us. We could talk all day on all these different scenarios. We had an example of how these non-governmental figures influenced transcendently the world.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're right. It wasn't the governments. They literally went to the people who could control the way information was being pushed out.
Yep.
So
interesting.
It is. We got a few questions. The first question is from John Sullivan. Is the real Ark of the Covenant necessary? So going back to the third temple and the ritual and all of that. So
fascinatingly, you're going to have different perspectives, but okay. I think if you go to the first century, for example, there's Jesus. There's no mention of the ark. And there is no historical evidence, as far as I know. I'm happy to be corrected on this, but as far as my research, that there was an ark in the temple that Jesus visited. And so we know from the book of Maccabees, which isn't scripture, but it has some history to it, that I believe it's in Second Maccabees chapter 1 or so, around there, chapter 2, where Jeremiah, there's a story of Jeremiah taking the ark and bringing it over out of before the destruction of the temple, and bringing it over to Mount Nebo. And there's other stories of the ark going down to Ethiopia, blah, blah, blah. Nevertheless, all that, those all happened prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in the 6th century BC. So that being the case, many wonder, well, there's no evidence of it being in the second temple when Jesus was there. So is it required to be in the third temple? No, it's not required. I think that the Jews would, the rabbis, again, they would have at least some replica in there. Does it need to be the original? The Bible never says it needs to be the original. They would definitely, I think they definitely would have one in there in order for their own, just to try to be thorough, because their desire is to follow Moses all the way. And so it's a commandment. So I think they would try to have one. But is it required? Theologically, well, we know it's irrelevant because of the book of Hebrews, but nevertheless.
Okay. Question 3 is from Keegan, my moderator. She said, Mondo, you touched on this regarding oligarchs. According to Daniel 7:24, the 10 kings arise from the fourth kingdom, which is the revived Roman Empire. Also, according to Revelation 17:12 and 17:17, it speaks of these 10 kings receiving a kingdom, not 10 kingdoms, and then they give this singular kingdom to the beast. With these verses in mind, could this mean that all 10 kings actually rise from the territory of ancient Rome?
Yeah, I totally agree, because so what we know is the key thing, though, there's a couple ways to look at it. One is we know that the beast system is a worldwide system. We know that. So what is the system? And in the book of Revelation, the word beast generally applies to at least two things. One is the system itself, this worldwide system of political whatever, or even farther, because it does dominate every tribe, nation, and tongue in that regard. We also know that the word beast applies to the person, because we know that in Revelation 19 and 20, where the beast and the false prophet are captured. They're thrown into the lake of fire. You don't throw a worldwide system into the lake of fire. These are individuals. So that being the case, I've kind of wondered about that myself, is that out of this system, these figures arise, and you think, well, what is the system? Is it referring to the specific political system of the geography, or is it referring to the power or the breadth of the transcendency of the system? So could it be that when we talk about this, we'll say often the beast system is being developed right now? Well, what we mean by that is the technology that's out there that's going to be a part of the system is being developed right now. So when we think about artificial intelligence, quantum computing, surveillance, 7,000 Starlinks around the world, cell phones, is it referring to that system that these 10 arise out of? I can't answer specifically because there's some ambiguity there. So I kind of, again, leave it as an open, but I'm not denying either that could these 10 figures arise out of the political geography of the revived Roman Empire? That could be true too.
Wow. Yeah, it's so fun to think about. And then this is from Rev 310, Pete. Do you own a whip and a leather fedora? And have you ever been covered by tarantulas while running out of cursed caves? I had to read that from Pete. He's in the comments.
I think that I'm unqualified to be a real archaeologist like Indiana Jones. I have been in caves. I did have a fedora once. I didn't really have a whip, but I did have rope. And I think I had a spider on me once. So
that is great.
Indiana Jones.
Pete, you win the question of the day.
I love it.
All right. And this is from Ryan Flanagan. Do you think the abomination of desolation will be a supercomputer installation in the new temple? Further, could it simply be just an unacceptable sacrifice?
Well, I probably wouldn't see it as a supercomputer necessarily, because a couple things. If we follow the pattern of what we know, because the abomination of desolation appears several times in the book of Daniel. Yep. And we, of course, we know that the original one was done by Antiochus Epiphanes in the 2nd century BC. So what you have there, at least in that one, was the sacrifice of a pig on an altar. Going in there, there was a desire to put a statue in there or an idol. And so we know that what it seems like is that the Antichrist, if in case the abomination of desolation is when the Antichrist goes into the temple and declares himself to be God, I think most Bible teachers would put those together as being at the same time. It could be, though, that immediately he goes in there, declares himself to be God, sets up an image, which could be a hologram or something like that in there in reference to himself. Could that include a supercomputer, it has to be more than artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence or super intelligence? Mm-hmm. Could it be that where the image then, because remember, he has power to give life to the image. Now that image could be right in the Holy of Holies itself. He's declaring himself, look, here I am. I'm declaring myself to God, and my godlike powers I'm going to put into this image, which then is the continual abomination of desolation. Sure. What could it involve technology? Because we do know, if you follow the pronouns, okay, this isn't a gender thing, but if you follow the pronouns in Revelation 13, it seems to be that it is the image that has been given the power that then turns around and causes all to be forced with a mark. It's the image that is doing it. If you follow the pronouns very carefully, it's fascinating. Wow. So could that be a super intelligent computer that's been given life, which whatever that means demonically or technologically, maybe together, that then enforces, because it has the ability to control by using all the technology that's been given into it by the 10 kings? Certainly. So I guess in one sense, we could say maybe it's all of what he just described. Wow. Or he or she, the person.
It's Ryan. Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, Ryan. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's interesting. That's fascinating to go back and even study the pronouns on stuff. This is why studying the Bible is so much fun. It really is, getting into like the nerdy stuff about it. It's so cool. Okay, so the next question is from Jenny Zeller. Could the Club of Rome map be a possible view into the future 10 nations run by the 10 kings from Revelation 17:12?
Again, hypothetically, I think if that did happen, it could be part of it. I would say, again, if it's part of the organizational structure, but the assumption would be that according to the 10 kings, remember the 10 kings come first. Yep. So would the regions arrive? We'd have to be seeing fully, but I see it as contradictory. I hate to say it that way, because okay, these are kings without a kingdom. So if they come first and they have their kingdoms with them, well, they have their kingdoms. And the Bible says they are kings without a kingdom. They don't receive their kingdom until they make this agreement with the Antichrist, and they give all their power and authority and then to rule with him. Mm-hmm. So it almost implies two ways. They're kings without a kingdoms, and they don't have rule, because in 13, it says they give their power over to him in order to have this rulership for a short period of time. So their rulership doesn't come until afterwards. So that's why it's hard for me to think the 10 regions where they have that authority prior, they're ruling somewhere. That seems contradictory to the text.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because this is kind of how I've always thought about it. And I am more than happy to be wrong. That's why I'm going to ask you, because I feel like you're a lot smarter on this stuff. I've always thought that to get to globalism, we would have to see regionalism happen first. Do you think that's accurate, or do you think that can shift a little bit based on just some of the stuff we've been talking about today?
Well, I would say that regionalism maybe is the we're looking at it. See, this is hard. Once the Club of Rome came out with their map, it's hard to remove that out of our minds.
I've seen it, and that's what's imprinted in mine as well.
And mine too. But recently, let me say it this way. We have seen globalism. Let's go back to, again, COVID as a great example.
Yep.
We saw globalism without regionalism.
Well, that's true.
Because the World Health Organization, even the European Union, these international, the United Nations for sure, they were able to bring recommendations, and they wanted to say requirements to member nations. And for the most part, these member nations agreed to those, especially health restrictions or requirements, but there was no regionalism there.
No, you're right. Hadn't thought about that.
The single UN system as a centralized place was able to accomplish their dictatorial, tyrannical, globalistic efforts without regionalism being involved at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way you could say that they were regionalism, it was regionalism, was that they would be their own little regions. You know what I mean? Like,
correct. You had
but
185 nations.
yeah,
So, but that's not 10 regions.
no, it's not 10. Right. Okay. All right. So we're almost done. We've got a couple more here. Do you think sacrificing the red heifers will make them harden their hearts to the gospel more? I think she's referring to the Jews.
Oh, look, 100% that, it's like we're living. If anybody's ever had the opportunity, I'll say that in a very general way, to engage in religious discussion with Orthodox Jews, okay, it's very frustrating, okay, and because they have no, apart from the Holy Spirit really working, and doesn't mean an Orthodox Jew has never been saved, because they have, but generally speaking, they have zero openness to Christianity. They have zero openness because they believe we're idolaters. They believe that we've gone away from worshiping the Father to worshiping this human Jesus. Okay, so for them, it's not even possible for them to consider Jesus as viable, because they don't see him. They see him as a human figure, and certainly as an idolater, as a false teacher, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay.
Do they look at us kind of like we see people worshiping pagan gods?
Yes. Oh, we're absolutely pagans. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So in their minds, that's why I think that and this is a different discussion, but I think that the apostasy / rebellion of 2 Thessalonians 2 is not it's a covenant. I think it is when they sign the covenant with the Antichrist from Daniel 9:27. That's the first event that starts the 70th week of Daniel. Well, for 2 Thessalonians 2 tells us the first event is the rebellion, apostasy. It's really apostasy is such a really unfortunate word. It really means, in all of its linguistic, it means rebellion. Okay, it could be political or religious. The first event of that starts the day of the Lord is the rebellion and the man of sin being revealed. So you look at all these things. So that if you compare that passage with Daniel 9, the Antichrist, literally in the Hebrew, it says, causes to prevail in the land the covenant. Well, in Daniel, the covenant is Moses. So when you think about that, all that to say, when you wrap that in a bow, when the Jews, their entire religious obsession is Moses, Moses, Moses. We want Moses. We don't care about Jesus. Jesus who? We don't. That guy's a pagan. He's in hell. Okay. So for them, as they develop the red heifer, their goal is to reestablish the temple, which is what? Is Moses.
Yep.
This is John 5, where there are, we have Moses. We don't need you. Jesus says, well, if you really believed in Moses, you'd believe me, because he wrote about me. Okay. So their entire goal is to reestablish Moses, which includes the temple and the sacrifices, which is what Daniel 9:27 says. That's the context. And so will it harden their heart? Absolutely it will.
Okay. So from Tori, I'm not sure if you guys have answered or talked about it already, but have they already found the ashes of the past 9 heifers, and do they need them? Which I know you answered earlier. And then why hasn't the Israeli government dug in Qumran?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Because, this in Qumran, the reason this comes up is because of Barfield, his work on the Copper Scroll. And so him and another very good writer, Shelley Neese, they wrote this book on the Copper Scroll, which in his evaluation of the Copper Scroll, he has come to believe that it's referring to Qumran. And so you have all this place there. And there's interesting, I went to Qumran a couple of years ago, and I went to a certain place that he mentions, or that she mentions in the book. And I verified it. It was exactly as he said it was. And so the idea then is that in Qumran, under Qumran, is all of the gold and all of the implements and the vessels of the previous temple hidden there. And so because it's in a national park, Israel currently doesn't allow excavations there. They have in the past, and there might be little things here and there, but the thing is, what Barfield was describing is that the Copper Scroll says it's all here. All the gold is here. So that's probably the reference that this person's making. So what we do know is that this would most likely include the ashes of the
Yeah.
previous. Okay. Now, the ashes of the previous red heifer are not required. They would be preferred, right? It's like job application, preferred, not required.
Yep.
Okay. They would prefer that's the case, because then the tradition has always been that the ashes of the previous one were combined with the ashes of the new one. And so you have this continuity going back to Moses.
Yep.
But definitely not required at all.
Wow. Okay. And then the final one from Allison Stoll Miller. Could Starlink be used to make a green screen of sorts around the earth, false signs and wonders, and whatever contract they want?
Well, in the sense of, I think that the if I'm understanding this, it would be like the idea of maybe a hologram or something like that. As far as I know, with the capabilities of Starlink, they aren't. They're relays. They're relays of information, which allow then again low orbit connection from Earth up, so that then it's spread out. Not so much that they have projectors that would be projecting some sort of hologram. I think that's more in line with some of the other fun things, DARPA,
Yep.
and other things like that. We have seen that the technology, for example, China, so they're way advanced on their drone technology, far more than we are. And people would look up and look at some of the things in the sky where they've done light shows with drones, all organized.
Yeah, it's wild.
It's pretty wild. Okay, so that would be pretty amazing. But from my understanding of what Starlink, the satellites themselves, they're just getting ready to come up with a new generation of satellites, which are you're talking like a gig down. It's a gig up and down. The abilities, that's more than I get at my house, as an example. But so far, now I could be not in the know, but the technology of having it create some sort of, again, holographic thing, don't know. But what we do know is this. There is technology, as we know, that's going to be in the final beast system.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that is fascinating is that let's not minimize or de-supernaturalize what the Bible says. We know in Revelation 13 that when the Antichrist comes, the false prophet, as an example, is going to be doing supernatural miracles. We know in 2 Thessalonians 2, he comes with all power and signs and lying wonders. So we have a very real supernatural element where the false prophet is calling down fire from heaven, which generally in biblical imagery, that's lightning. Okay, so imagine going out there and you say, well, prove to me you're from, whatever. And then he says, okay, and he calls down lightning, just like we see in Elijah in 1 Kings 17, the Baal battle there. So let's not minimize that everything needs to be some technological sleight of hand. It could be actually supernatural. And I think it most likely will be absolute supernatural miracles that don't need technology.
Wow. Well, that's something to think about too. There's so much of this stuff so fascinating. Well, before we close up, Mondo, I would love for you to just share the gospel with people. And then I'll have a video link down below for people who want to dive in a little bit deeper about heaven and hell and that sort of thing they could click on. But I would love for you to just kind of talk about like, hey, if you're kind of nervous about what's going on, what can I do? What can you do?
Yes. Here we are. And even though a lot of this stuff is quite fun, at the end of the day, our goal is to see people come to salvation through Jesus. I mean, I wasn't raised a Christian, so I understand what it's like to not live a Christian life, but then to be confronted with the truth of the gospel that not everybody goes to heaven. Those are Jesus's words very clearly. Mm-hmm. To some people, he'll say, I never knew you. And that's really our hope, is that he gave these things in advance in order that it would encourage us. It would also reveal to us Jesus's words that we're at the end of the age. And the goal is to see people come to see all these things and go, judgment's coming. I mean, that's not hyperbole. Judgment's coming. And Jesus has warned us, hey, watch and be sober and be in a sense of have your faith settled. And that is only found through trusting in what Jesus did on the cross. And so if that's you, today's the day. I mean, all you got to do is really pray and just acknowledge that you've sinned and that you need a savior. That's why Jesus came, and it demonstrates God's love for us. And so if you're a Christian, I would say, again, nothing to fear here. Be encouraged that we're watching it all come together. It's an exciting time. It gives us opportunity to share but also to be busy doing God's work until he comes. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. We want to see people rescued from the coming tribulation and time of judgment, which Jesus himself described as the worst time in the history of creation itself. So you can miss it if you put your trust in.
Amen. Mondo, thank you so much for coming on today to talk about two really interesting topics. It's always a pleasure getting to chat with you. Yeah, we just appreciate all the work you guys are doing over at Prophecy Watchers and the people y'all bring on. It's just awesome. I love it that you guys actually have so many different viewpoints just to consider things from different angles. It's super fun just to listen to everybody in their respective fields of study. So thank you again for taking time out of your day to come on here. And with that, guys, I think we'll make it a wrap. And until next time, keep your eyes on the sky and keep your ears listening for that shofar. I'll see you in the next one. Maranatha.